Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hey everybody, welcome to Resistance Live for the 19th of September 2025. Special shout out to our iTunes listeners today. We have finally been able to correct the glitch that we were having with iTunes. So if you are listening to the audio on iTunes shortly after the live broadcast on YouTube, we are so happy to have you here. Very grateful for you. And for our Spotify listeners, we will be up and running on Spotify, I think today, finally. So all of our back-end glitches have been corrected, and we are so glad to be back out on the audio as well as the video here on YouTube, as we are 4 days a week. All right. So Trump went off yesterday on Air Force One about what he thinks should be happening to anybody who criticizes him. And I have to point out that in the lens of all of this, from a legal standpoint, there's no question that the things that he's trying, that the things that he is claiming he has the authority to do, are in direct violation of the First Amendment. So essentially, the statements that he made yesterday on Air Force One were that any late night host who criticizes him should be taken off the air. Any station that airs any late night host who criticizes him should have their broadcast licenses revoked. And I will just remind you all that what the First Amendment prohibits is the government interference, among other things, the government interference in freedom of speech. So what he's suggesting is exactly what the First Amendment prohibits. And while I know that there is a sense right now that the law doesn't matter and the law is just words, I will say that I agree with some other prominent legal commentators who have been saying over the last couple of days that it's really important that we continue to give voice to the fact that what he's doing is illegal. The courts have stopped him in numerous instances since he took office in January. So it's not as if he is getting a free pass from the courts. I mean, actually quite far from it. The last time I looked at this, the courts were ruling against him at least 75% of the time, and they were sticking. Some situations have not, obviously, but here we need to keep reiterating that what he's trying to do is a direct violation of the Constitution. And as I said yesterday with regard to Jimmy Kimmel, and as will certainly be the case with anybody else who he tries to shut down, there appears to be a very cut and dried prima facie First Amendment case if in fact the US government has interfered with a private company airing information or statements or commentary that is critical of him. And again, I have to point this out in the context of his malignant narcissism, which of course we talk about quite a bit here on Resistance Live, because the thing to remember here is that, of course, because he is a malignant narcissist, he cannot tolerate criticism of any kind. So we're seeing here an intersection of his position as a strongman autocrat, wanting to suppress any criticism for the sake of glomming onto power, and his very obvious narcissistic injury whenever anyone of any prominence raises their voice against him. Now, very good news on this front. Stephen Colbert still has his show. And if you happen to miss Stephen Colbert's opening monologue last night, he is just completely gloves off right now. I've been a fan for a very long time. He actually lives not far from me. I haven't been formally introduced to him, but I've been in the same room with him a bunch of times since we returned to the East Coast. And I will just say that he's a man of tremendous integrity, and I also don't think he's going anywhere. Now, all that said, there have been a few people over the last couple of days who have been calling for Stephen Colbert to run for president. Please don't do that. I just have to remind everybody that while Vladimir Zelensky is certainly an exception to the rule, we need people in government who actually are experienced leaders. We need people in government who are fighters. Stephen Colbert is an actor and a comedian. And I think we've kind of proven at this point that electing people who don't know what they're doing really is a recipe for disaster. I personally am not at all interested in having Stephen Colbert run for president. And frankly, I think that there's also this continuing idea of like white men coming in to save us, that as much as I love Stephen Colbert, is something that we should truly abandon in the national discourse on political folks running for office. So I'm not in favor of that one, but all that said, I'm very much in favor of what Stephen Colbert is doing on his own show right now. Quite to the contrary, by the way, of what Jimmy Fallon did last night, which was designed to be a joke that actually ended up just repeating Trump talking points. And we all know on which side of the fence Jimmy Fallon lies, but that didn't stop Trump from going after Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers yesterday either. So, you know, again, this whole experience has been a lesson that no one is safe at this point from the wrath of this president and his white supremacist administration. So again, I will just say to everybody, there will be lawsuits coming. In fact, there were photos taken yesterday of Jimmy Kimmel arriving at his lawyer's office with a smirk on his face. This story is quite far from over. And that is what I have to say about that. Now, on the autocracy, rising fascism front, we have to talk about what's happening in Broadview, Illinois this morning, right outside of Chicago. Broadview, Illinois is the home to an ICE detention center. And very early this morning, before the sun was even up, a group of protesters showed up at Broadview to protest ICE detentions there. And this event, thanks to ICE, got very quickly out of hand. So as of right now, they have actually arrested and brought into the detention center peaceful protesters who were out in front. ICE became very physically violent with some of the protesters, slamming a young woman to the ground, physically attacking other protesters. They tear gassed a news van, and essentially the protesters stopped ICE vans from moving the peaceful protesters that they arrested with no grounds out of the facility for quite some time. Now, apparently, the vans have been moved. But Kat Abu Ghazala, I think I'm pronouncing her name right. I always mess it up. My apologies. Who, of course, is running for office from that area, was actually at the protest and filming it. And it truly was one of the more significant pushbacks from ICE that we have seen. I will also just point out that these ICE officers are dressed like they're going to war. I know that doesn't surprise anybody any longer, but this was literally like a peaceful group of protesters with signs and chanting. They were far enough removed from the facility. They were sitting down in some cases and were physically assaulted by ICE officers. So this is something that I really want to encourage people to pay attention to, in part because this is coming to every town in America. And you do need to understand not just what we're up against, but also that protesting and making your voice heard really matters. So does videotaping these kind of events, because the violence that is being perpetrated against people is extreme. And I have to say that there's a couple particular videos going around about what they did to this young woman who was sitting on the ground that are incredibly disturbing. Literally, I'm surprised they didn't break her pelvis from the way that they threw her. So again, eyes on this. There's going to be a lot of news coverage about this today. People need to continue making their voices heard. And also, it's really important that average everyday citizens who aren't paying attention to what's happening get to see the visuals of exactly what ICE is doing to all of us, right? To like average, everyday peaceful protesters, to people who are US citizens. And, again, they brought protesters into the detention center with no basis whatsoever, arrested them and brought them inside. So this is something that, again, folks should keep their eyes on today. All right, we have to talk about the budget. Just a few minutes before I came on the air, the House passed a continuing resolution that would continue the current budget until November. It passed by a tiny fraction, and there were 2 Republicans who voted against it. No one was exactly sure whether or not this one was going to pass, but what's happening now is that this budget resolution will go to the Senate, which is taking it up very quickly this afternoon. It is expected to fail. In addition to that, Chuck Schumer, much to my chagrin and the chagrin of everybody who cares about democracy, has put forward a Democratic version of allowing the government to stay funded. At this stage of the game, why the Democrats are participating in trying to give the Republicans the money they need to perpetrate violence against American citizens and immigrants is beyond me. Like, I don't get it. And the excuse that Chuck Schumer is giving is that it will keep his resolution will keep healthcare premiums from going up. I'm really sorry, but as somebody who's on the ACA, like my entire family is on Obamacare, I am expecting that our premiums are going to double next year. I don't know how I'm going to afford it. I get that it's a primary issue. It is not as important as whether or not ICE has the money that they need to do what they're doing this morning in Broadview, Illinois, or whether the military has the money that it needs to bomb civilians in a boat from Venezuela, or whether or not, for that matter, ICE has the money to kind of like randomly ship people off to Ghana where they are being turned over to their home countries for torture and execution. So I personally do not get, I continue to struggle with this, why the Democrats are in any way, shape, or form cooperating with Republican aims by agreeing to anything having to do with giving the government money right now. Yes, I mean, we've been talking about government shutdowns here literally for almost 9 years. Yes, government shutdowns have consequences to people. Social Security still gets paid out. Certain benefits still get paid out, like to the VA. But it does mean that essential workers are the only people who essentially stay on the job. That, by the way, would be a really interesting moment right now, because it would mean that a whole bunch of Trump's agenda would be stopped in its tracks. And so for whatever reason that the Democrats are considering that they should like keep the budget going, they're fools at this point. I truly don't understand it. And I find myself continuously just, and I know many of you are in the same boat, desperately wanting a real opposition party here. You know, the only person in Democratic leadership who I see standing up right now for what's right is Malcolm Kenyatta, who of course is like vice chair of the DNC, and full disclosure, a friend of mine. All that said, he's the only person who was talking about the fact that the Democratic Party needs to fight for democracy right now. Right? That the Democratic Party needs to actually be an opposition party. And it is just beyond me why Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and so many other, Dick Durbin, so many other senior leaders of the Democratic Party are refusing to fight. It's cowardice. Maybe it's like, focus groups that they're talking to that have no relevance to what's actually happening on the ground. But there is so much frustration in the Democratic Party base right now about why they're just simply not standing up. And, there are plenty of explanations for this. The most cynical among us think that they're, fascist enablers. The rest of us think they just don't get it. Or that for that matter, they're benefiting in some way from like dark money and want to keep getting the paychecks coming in. I just am fed up and sick of it. I do not understand it. This is the moment to shut down the government. This is a key moment to do it, actually, because it will force the Republicans to concede on really key issues. And any shutdown and the harm that it does to the country will be laid squarely at the feet of Republicans. So to me, I just don't get what the Democratic Party is doing. It's not the first time since, Trump took office. Again, this one, to me, is a no-brainer. This is such an obvious strategic win to say we are not cooperating right now. We will not cooperate in giving you the money to carry out your fascist aims. No. So I don't get it. But we'll see what happens in the Senate today. Again, they're taking it up very quickly. Like I said, both the resolutions right now, both Schumer's and the one that just passed the House, are expected to fail today. And we'll see what happens next. All right. I had a question today on the Patreon feed from my dear old friend Amy, which was essentially about how do we get people to wake up? How do we get to that like 3.5% critical mass? All right, so I want to handle the second part first, because as many of you know, there was this study conducted a number of years ago, got huge publicity in the BBC and elsewhere, that said that if 3.5% of a population is enabled and engaged in creating change, that revolutionary society level change can happen very quickly. Okay, I have to make something really clear about this, though. This is not about 3.5% of people showing up for a protest. It's not about 3.5% of people showing up for No King's Day. What the 3.5% number is about is people who are actively, regularly engaged in creating social justice and change. Okay, so the 3.5% number is somewhat maligned because and misunderstood, because I think what a lot of people expect is that if you get 3.5% of the American population in the streets, magically all of this is going to be fixed. And that's not actually how it works, okay? Like what we actually need is for people to be engaged in regular, routine community organizing where they live to move the needle, okay? And again, that requires a much deeper level of engagement than simply getting somebody to wake up to the fact that we're living under a fascist dictatorship. So with regard to getting people to wake up, again, I have to follow the lead here of Mariam Kaba, who I feel like I quote like pretty much daily on this broadcast. But one of the things that she talks about is that people are not engaged right now for a variety of reasons, right? They may be terrified, which we talk a lot here about. They may be in freeze mode, right? They may have like things happening in their family or aging parents that they're caring for, or they've experienced a trauma or a loss or a death, right? We can't actually badger people into getting engaged, right? This is one reason, by the way, why community organizing is so important. Because one of the ways in which you actually can get people to start showing up or caring is by creating spaces where those people feel cared for themselves. And that means that you have to start at a really basic needs level. Like we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. You have to actually start organizing from a place of meeting people where they are. And that may mean like who's hungry in your neighborhood, right? It may mean who needs care in my friend group. It may mean I'm going to have people over for dinner. We're going to have a wonderful community space that feels nurturing and calm and peaceful. And then at the end, when everybody's like had a lovely time and feeling really good and safe, I'm going to bring up like, what do you think we need to do right now to take care of our community? Again, you have to think outside the box here. And I have to remind you that in an era like this, where there's so much going on that is terrifying, trying to scare people into action will actually have the reverse effect. It will cause people to hide. And that's not what we want. What we need is deep community engagement at a needs level, right? And you can go look at Maslow's hierarchy if you want to. But one of the things that's big on Maslow's hierarchy, once you get through like basic needs of like food, water, shelter, clothing, is the issue of belonging. And one of the things that is direly needed in this era is a sense of belonging that alleviates isolation. Because when people have a sense of belonging and they are invited into safe space to participate in communal action that gives them a sense of safety and being present and surrounded by people who care, they are much more likely to engage in that kind of sustainable action that then moves the needle. So people need to get very like clear-headed on exactly what is needed right now. Approach what you are doing in your own organizing from a community caretaking perspective, and you will have much better success, trust me on this, in getting people engaged and staying engaged than if you are terrifying them or trying to terrify them about how scary it all is and the sky is falling and everything's falling apart and, democracy is going to be lost. That strategy is literally going to cause people to shut down. So again, the 3.5% is a little bit misunderstood. And the more that you approach the work that you're doing as sustainable community organizing from a place of taking care of people, and by the way, that's a two-way street. You get nurtured, you get emotional support, you get your needs met when you do this work, the greater likelihood we will have of getting people actually engaged to the point where the needle moves, okay? All right, so I have to just mention one thing that happened yesterday in New York City, which may feel like a kind of localized thing, but it's not. Yesterday, 11 New York State officials and New York City officials were arrested trying to do their oversight job at the federal detention facility in downtown Manhattan. This is a place where, by the way, again, we're back to ICE detention here, but where there have been allegations that the food is bug infested, that they're not feeding people adequately, that the conditions are unsanitary, that people are sick and not getting medical treatment. And these officials, including Brad Lander, who, by the way, we all know was previously arrested by ICE in escorting someone out of their immigration hearing, and Jumaane Williams, who is the New York City public advocate. I have personally met him. He is a marvelous individual, an incredible advocate for New York City. They were arrested along with 9 other officials, just simply trying to get into the facility to see if the allegations were accurate. Again, one of the things that we have to keep in mind here is that, once Ross Baraka was arrested, the mayor of Newark was arrested at Delaney Hall in New Jersey, all bets were off about what ICE felt empowered to do with regard to state and federal elected officials. So this is, again, an instance where elected officials were trying to uphold their oath and exercise the authority and the power that's been given to them to oversee facilities in their own jurisdiction. And here we are, and we don't know what the next steps on this are going to be. So again, this is like another thing to keep your eye on. Okay. I have to say like one thing. It's a Friday, you know, and Fridays in Trumpland are a real thing. And I sometimes have these moments where I log on to the Patreon feed where so many of you ask me questions on a daily basis. And we have this thing where like people are spinning out, right? Where there's this thing of like, I'm really overwhelmed and I can't handle what's happening. That's understandable. Like everybody needs breaks. I've in fact given like prescriptions to some of our big time organizing clients to literally take 2 weeks off sometimes. Okay. Everybody needs breaks. Nobody can do it all. Yes, you should focus on 1 or 2 key issues and let everybody else do the rest. It's okay to do that. Okay. And at the same time, this is a day where I have to remind everybody that we have literally no idea what's going to happen next. Okay. And that's something that you really have to keep in the forefront of your mind. So like today, for example, somebody who's been a follower and a subscriber on Patreon for a very long time came onto the feed and said, I woke up this morning terrified. What happens if Vance doesn't certify the election in 2029? First of all, like we have no idea who's going to be the vice president in 2029. Can we just be honest about that? Like any number of things could happen between now and then. And on top of it, right, the certification of the election results is going to depend on the outcome of the election, right? And maybe some other things like who controls the Senate and who controls the House, which, by the way, is something that is up for grabs very, very soon, like a little over a year from now. And so I want folks to do themselves a favor and do those around them a favor. And remember that, like, as much as history is teaching us certain lessons right now about the way in which fascist dictatorships unfold, we also are not crystal ball readers. Nobody can predict the future. And particularly when we have an environment where like 75% of the people in the country hate what Trump is doing, where we have a president who is quite obviously unwell, where we have looming midterm elections coming up in a little over a year, when we have very interesting progressive, left-leaning, even Democratic Socialist candidates on the verge of winning elections everywhere. By the way, Minneapolis, early voting opens today on your mayoral election. Vote for Omar Fatah. There's any number of things that could happen between now and then, and even, you know, between now and next week, that would completely change the lay of the land. So one of the ways in which you have to continue cultivating hope and therefore cultivating motivation in yourself to be a part of the solution is to remind yourself that we have no idea what's going to happen next. And we also have no idea at this point exactly what's going to work, exactly what could tip a series of dominoes that would lead to very rapid shifts in the balance of power in this country, right? And that means, you know, like, what happens in states, what happens in localities, and what happens at the top of our federal government. I have to remind you all, by the way, that it's not like every effort is failing. And this is something that people need to remember. Just yesterday, for instance, both a Northeast and a West Coast coalition of states were announced to do the job that the CDC has abandoned under RFK Jr. So we now have a coalition of states in the Northeast, which includes, like, you know, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Maine, right? New Hampshire and Vermont are not in it. Don't ask me why, but nonetheless, whole bunch of Northeast states have come together to make recommendations about vaccines, to collect data on health and things like, you know, outbreaks of things like measles, right? And they're going to be providing reliable information, not just to everybody who lives in those states, but actually like to others, because that data will be extrapolated. The same is true, by the way, for the West Coast. So we now have California, Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii doing exactly the same thing. And they are going to be making joint recommendations and considering collecting joint data that will allow for citizens to actually have reliable information. So again, this is an example of the ways in which the things that we're experiencing can cause unpredictable outcomes. Nobody would have guessed, by the way, back in last November, that we would see coalitions of whole states coming together to do the work of the CDC. And that is a model, by the way, for the ways in which other coalitions of states could work in this era. So again, you have to keep your chin up. You have to remember that we have no idea what's happening and what could happen, rather. And you have to really also remember that spinning out is a trauma response. It's an attempt to try to control things. It's hypervigilance, which is also like, a symptom of traumatic response. And your best work is served in not just staying present, but also remembering that like any number of things could happen that would actually be good. So we have to stay in the work. And, I do just want to remind everybody that there are elections happening this year that are very significant. Here in New Jersey, we have Mikey Sherrill running for governor. Abigail Spanberger is running for governor in Virginia. We have a number of other off-season, quote unquote, they're not off-season if you live there, elections happening around the country. The New York City mayor's election is happening in November. So there's all sorts of elections happening. And you also really do have to stay very engaged right now where you live. All right, that's my rant for this Friday. There will be a bonus broadcast this afternoon for our Patreon-only subscribers at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. I will see all of our Patreon subscribers there. Big reminder that we are still running that 20% off annual subscriptions bonus right now. So if you want to join us over on Patreon and you're new to us, you can head on over there, patreon.com/resistancelive. Use the code podcast to get 20% off an annual subscription. And please support independent media. We spent so much time yesterday with regard to Jimmy Kimmel and discussions about other platforms that are under threat, talking about the importance of supporting independent media in this era, yours truly included. But please support independent media if you have a little bit of money to spread around. For us, it's really not much, right? But it makes a huge difference for me and my team and my family for that matter. So please step in and support if this broadcast is meaningful to you. And I will catch all of our Patreon subscribers later on today for your bonus weekly broadcast. And I will see the rest of you back here next week. We do have an educational training video coming at you on Monday over on the Ripple Effect Institute channel about why now, right now, not in the future, not when things calm down, not when you feel a little safer, not any other moment. Now is the moment where you have to actually get engaged and start fighting back. So that's coming at you on Monday. I think it's dropping at noon Eastern. So stay tuned for that. I'll catch the rest of you back here live next week. Please have a good weekend. Give yourself a little breathing room. Get out and touch some grass. I'm going apple picking this weekend with my kids. Good time to do that. And I will catch you all back here next week. All right. Have a good rest of your Friday, everyone. See you later. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.